So you've got an iPhone 4, and the logic board inside's great, but the housing, not so much. You probably want to change it. So this video will show you how to transfer the logic board from this iPhone into the housing for this iPhone. Now this iPhone has a really good condition frame, display, and I'll be putting a very nice condition rear cover glass on too. It's a pretty simple process and shouldn't take too long, even for beginners, because there aren't too many screws to keep track of. Now before we begin, I will go through what you'll need. You'll need a pentalobe bit to remove the bottom 2 screws of the iPhone 4. Unless you've got an earlier model, then you'll just need the standard Phillips bit. To remove the screws inside the iPhone, you'll need a Phillips 00 driver and a flathead driver, a fairly small one. I'm using the number 1. No, I'm sorry. I'm using the number 1.5 from the iFixit kit. Also, a standoff screw bit would work quite well for removing the standoff screw inside the iPhone 4. Anyway, with all that off to the side and the iPhone 4 right here, let's get right into it. So to begin, we'll need to remove the 2 pentalobe screws on the bottom of the iPhone 4. You've got to be kind of careful with these because they can strip easily, and they're no fun to remove if they're stripped. Now it's important with most electronics to keep track of where every screw comes out of so that it goes back into the exact same place. Oh, and of course, before we begin, make sure your iPhone is powered off so that it won't turn on at any point during the repair. Once you've got the back cover glass removed, you have access to the internals of the iPhone. Just put the back cover glass over somewhere safe, and you can get started. First and most important step when conducting any sort of repair on a mobile device is to disconnect the battery if possible. Some devices don't allow that, but luckily the iPhone 4 does allow that. And that's just held in place with a Phillips 00 screw. A fairly long one. Disconnect the battery from the left side with a little tab sticking out, and remove the grounding clip that's hidden underneath. And keep those together. Next step, we need to remove the 2 screws covering the shield for the 30-pin connector. Now the internal of your iPhone 4 may look a bit different. Certain models have different colored shields. So if you had a later production one, they'd be silver, like this one, instead of black. But the same steps apply. It's important to make sure you have the right size bits that you don't accidentally round any screws, because then they'll be pretty difficult to remove. And they are quite fragile inside the iPhone 4. Especially the board-mounted ones like the 2 I'm dealing with right now. So it's important not to over-tighten anything. Once you've removed all the screws for the shield, you can kind of pry up on it and remove it. Now it's got a bit of a difficult thing to remove there, but it's just got 2 clips along the bottom that secure to kind of a mid-frame right in the middle of the iPhone, about here. Once you've removed the shield, you can now start removing the connectors so that you can access the logic board. So the 2 display connectors up at the top, then these 3 guys over here. And they can be a bit difficult to remove sometimes. And then the camera. Now that you've got all those removed, the next step is disconnecting the 30-pin connector. This is held down with some adhesive, and sometimes it's harder to remove than others. Just be careful not to pull at it too hard and have it come loose too quickly. There's a screw in the bottom left corner of the logic board, and then there's one more here. It should be covered with a water damage indicator, which is a little white circle. I think this iPhone's been serviced before, so that's not on it. So I'm just going to remove that without it. If it does have that, you can remove it with tweezers and save it for when you reinstall it, which is the best thing you can do. That way it keeps it looking original. Next step is to remove the standoff screw in the top right corner of the logic board. And you'll just need your flathead, that's size 1.5 in the iFixit toolkit. Final step is removing the SIM card tray. Now you can use the little SIM eject bit that comes in iFixit's toolkits, or just the SIM card eject tool that came with your iPhone. Now that I've got the SIM tray removed, I can now remove the logic board. Actually, one more step. I will need to remove this little antenna connector down here by the speaker. Once that's disconnected, I can pry up on the logic board. Take your time, because if a connector gets caught on it, you don't want to accidentally tear it. And now the logic board's out. Now there is one little piece, two little pieces that you've got to pay attention to. I can actually tell mine's been serviced because one of them's been reinstalled the wrong way. This little rubber bumper type thing goes on the top part of the logic board. It's very tiny. You can barely see it. With the little sort of indent to the right. That way there's a spot for the backlight cable to rest. It goes just about like that. It's pretty challenging. The other piece that you've got to watch out for is this little grounding clip. You don't want to accidentally damage that. Now that we've successfully removed the logic board and we've got the empty frame, I'll switch over to the new frame and complete the process. Now I'm going to be using the screws from the donor phone to reassemble this board in this housing. That way I know they're going into the right holes. Most of the time that won't be an issue, but as this phone was previously serviced, I can't be sure and I'm not going to want to risk it. If you're concerned about where a screw goes, the iFixit website tutorials have the screw lengths listed in each step. So if you've got a set of, I think it's calipers, you can use those to check that you're putting the right screw in the right hole. Now that we've got the iPhone logic board out of the old iPhone and into the donor housing, you need to reinstall the logic board. Now it's important to make sure that none of the connectors are tucked under the logic board, and even the battery pull tab. You want to make sure everything is going on top of the board because nothing connects under it. One thing that can be forgotten about sometimes is the little antenna cable down here, so you can kind of just bend it out of the way. Be careful not to tear it. And once that's in, you can kind of jiggle its way in. Make sure everything's aligned properly. And it should just kind of seat in place. What I like to do is I'll install the SIM tray so that it holds everything in place while I screw everything in. Next, we can kind of just follow the steps we just did, but in reverse. You can begin by reinstalling the screws. Actually, I'm going to start with the standoff screw first because I've still got the flathead driver on my bit. And it's important not to over tighten the screws, and especially when you're using a flathead driver, you want to be careful not to have it slip out and accidentally damage any of the board components. So we can switch out the flathead, back for the Phillips. And start installing all the other screws. Now this one is the one I was talking about earlier. This is the one that has the little water damage indicator, and I'm actually going to be using the one that I took out of the donor phone. So I'm just going to screw that back into place, and then I'm going to pick up a little white sticker and reapply that. That way it looks pretty much brand new. The adhesive may not always be perfect, but that should hold. That's all the screws that we'll need to install before we can get the little shields reinstalled. So we've got the volume buttons and the volume buttons, the front-facing camera, and the headphone jack connected. Next up, we've got the rear camera that's going in, and you want to make sure you install it with the top first, and then put the bottom in, because it has a couple of grounding clips on the bottom that kind of push it up against the logic board to make sure it's got a good connection. And then you can reattach the display connectors, and those kind of just attach over top of the little extra bit that comes out near the flash for the camera. Next step is the dock connector, and we'll get that reconnected. And then we've got this little antenna down here. It can be challenging to install sometimes, but using a set of tweezers and a black stick can really help. You just got to make sure you align it properly, and then you're all good. So next step is installing the shields. So I'm going to use the old shields out of this that were originally with it. That way it's as original as possible in this new housing. So for the top shield, you kind of have to install the bottom part first until you hear it click, and then you can kind of just connect it, and it should hold in place like that. Once that's installed, we can use the screws that we removed to reinstall that. And you want to make sure that they aren't over tightened, but they aren't too loose. It's kind of a delicate tightening thing. The very long one goes in the very top. It can be a bit challenging to align sometimes because it is such a long screw. That's in now. Next set of screws are the ones you've got to be quite careful with, because if you over tighten them, you can actually remove the mounting posts from the logic board. You do want to make sure that you don't accidentally install them crooked. So what I like to do is, once I've got the other screws in place, I'll loosen them a bit. That way we've got a bit of play in the shield, and we can adjust it so that the other screws aren't creating too much force on the logic board. And I'm going to repeat the process for the lower one too. That way they can both be installed properly without needing to worry about any sort of alignment or damaging the board. Once those two are in, you can go back and tighten all the other screws. And then we've just got one more little shield cowling type thing. And that just gets installed over top of the 30-pin dock connector. And finally, not quite finally, we've got a step after this, but this is just the little grounding clip and antenna connector cover that goes underneath the battery, and you just align that, reconnect the battery, and screw it all into place. Once that's in place, you can test the phone out. And voila. Final step is just reinstalling the back cover, and you've completed a board swap. This one's a bit tight, so I'll clean it. If your cover doesn't slide smoothly, it's probably got some dirt built up. What I recommend for keeping that clean is a dab of isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip, or cotton swab, or whatever it's called. One of those things. You go all around the edge to remove any sort of dirt or debris that's preventing it from sliding smoothly. Now that that's all clean, we can slide the back cover back into place if it wants to. Sometimes it can be a bit tight, but there we go, it's in place. And now the phone is working. Now this one's disabled currently, but I'm looking into fixing that. The final step is reinstalling the 2 pentalobe screws that we removed in the first step. It's important to make sure these are aligned to prevent damaging the stainless steel frame. And just tightening them so that they're about finger tight and flush will do to prevent stripping. That could be tightened just a bit more. There we go. Your phone is completely reassembled and in a new housing that is in much better condition. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you watching this video. If you felt this video was helpful to you, please feel free to like it, subscribe, and leave a comment if you want. Also, I've linked my Twitter in the description below, so if you want to check that out, that's there too, I guess. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.